A man who spends his life spotting threats never expects the biggest one to come from his own home. My name is Quinn Fenton. I'm 52 years old. I run a private security firm out of Charleston, South Carolina. Built it from the ground up after a career in special operations. My job is risk assessment, extraction, and threat neutralization. I see patterns, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities before most people know they exist. My men trust me because I don't miss things. Or at least, I thought I didn't. It started with the perfume. Hannah had worn the same scent since I met her. Something subtle, classic. One night, I stepped into her bedroom and caught a different scent in the air. Sharper, floral, something meant to stand out. It wasn't for me. I asked about it. She smiled, ran a hand through her dark hair, and said, just wanted a change. That was her first mistake. Men like me don't believe in coincidences. I noted the shift, logged it. Over the next few weeks, the details stacked up. Her phone was always face down on the counter. A text would come in and she'd step out of the room. Work dinners that never used to happen suddenly popped up on the calendar. She dressed a little sharper on certain nights, spent an extra 10 minutes in front of the mirror, checking herself in angles she never had before. One evening I was cleaning my SIG P320 at the kitchen table when she came in. She hesitated for half a second before walking past me, grabbing a jacket. I won't be late. Where? I didn't look up from the slide assembly. She smiled, the kind you put on when you think you're in control. Dinner with Valerie. Valerie. That was mistake number 2. Because Valerie had moved to Florida last year. I nodded, set the barrel down, and let her walk out the door. I didn't ask again. I'd already made my decision. That night, I called in a favor. The next morning, I met Zachary Winston in a quiet diner just outside the historic district. Zachary was a forensic accountant, one I used for discreet financial deep dives when clients needed intel on competitors, shady business partners, or offshore leaks. He worked slow, but he was thorough. Right now, he looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He adjusted his glasses, tapping his fingers against the ceramic mug in front of him. You're asking me to dig into your wife's finances? His voice was barely above a whisper. You owe me. I stirred my coffee. Zachary swallowed hard, nodded. You're right. But, I have to say, man, you don't want to do this. You might not like what you find. I didn't respond. He sighed, pulled out a small notepad, and started scribbling. All right. You want transaction history, anything out of the ordinary, flagged hotel charges, gifts, withdrawals? All of it. He wiped his forehead, glancing around. This is, delicate. You sure you want to know? I leaned forward slightly. Zachary, you think I came here for small talk? He flinched, nodded. I'll need a couple days. I left without another word. That evening, I placed a GPS tracker under the wheel well of Hannah's car. Small, undetectable, fed into an app on my phone. I didn't want to confront her yet. I wanted to know how deep this ran. Who? Where? How long? There was a saying in my old unit, never go into a room you don't control. 2 days later, Zachary called. You need to see this in person. His voice shook. I met him at his office, a small space above a real estate firm on Broad Street. Zachary locked the door behind me, then slid a manila folder across the desk. She's been spending money at the Charleston Harbor Resort. Not once. Not twice. 5 times in the last 2 months. And then there's this. He flipped open the folder, pointing to a line on the bank statement. Flowers. Jewelry. Dinners. He exhaled. Not for you, I take it. I looked at the printouts. Neat columns of betrayal. No hesitation. No remorse. Just transactions. Who? I asked. Zachary wiped his hands on his pants, pulled out another sheet. This is where it gets messy. He hesitated, then set down a printed photo. A man, mid-40s, expensive suit, smug expression. Ethan West, Zachary said. Real estate. Married. 2 kids. I looked at the photo. Memorized his face. Tell me everything. Zachary swallowed. You're not gonna like it. Say it anyway. And he did. Every detail. Every lie. Every late night. I took the folder and walked out. I didn't slam the door. Didn't rush. I walked back to my truck, climbed inside, and sat there. Then I smiled. Because she thought she was playing a game. But the thing about games? You only win if you understand the rules. And she had no idea what game she'd just entered. That night I watched Hannah. Not in the way a husband watches his wife, but the way a man watches a target. She moved through the house with the same quiet confidence she always had, but I saw the cracks now. The subtle way she kept her phone near, how she glanced at it when she thought I wasn't looking. The slight tension in her shoulders when she got a message. She thought she was being careful. She wasn't. I didn't say a word. I just let her think she was winning. The next morning, I went into the office early. My company, Fenton Security Solutions, wasn't a typical security firm. We didn't do bodyguard work for celebrities or install home cameras for nervous homeowners. My contracts were with men who understood risk, real risk. Private investors who needed offshore assets protected, high-level executives who couldn't afford to have their movements tracked, politicians who wanted certain things to remain discreet. My men weren't ex-cops looking for easy work. They were trained operators, former military men who knew how to handle problems with precision. When I walked into the briefing room, the guys were already gearing up for the day's assignments. Logan, my second-in-command, looked up from his laptop. "You're in early." "Couldn't sleep." He smirked, went back to typing. "Gonna be a long day." Got a contract update from the senator's office, some chatter about potential threats near his estate. "You want me to brief you later?" "Yeah. Also, I need something personal looked into." Logan's hands paused over the keyboard. He knew me too well. "Work-related?" "No." He nodded once, not asking more. That was the thing about Logan, he knew when to press and when to back off. I gave him the folder. He opened it, his expression unreadable as he scanned the pages. When he got to Ethan West's picture, he let out a low whistle. "Damn. He looks like a guy who thinks he's smarter than he is." "That's because he is." Logan set the folder down. "What do you need?" "Pattern of life. Who he meets, where he goes. Any skeletons in his closet, I want them laid out." Logan leaned back, folded his arms. "You gonna handle this personal, or are we talking full blackout?" "I handle my own business." He grinned. "Figured. Give me a few days." By the time I got home that evening, Hannah was already dressed up. Subtle but noticeable heels, the kind she never wore for me anymore, a dress I hadn't seen in years. She stood by the counter, checking her phone. When she heard me come in, she tucked it away and turned, forcing a smile. "Long day?" I shrugged. "Same as always." I dropped my keys on the counter, walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water. "Where you headed?" She hesitated just for a fraction of a second before smoothing her expression. "Dinner with the girls. You remember Jenna and Kate, right?" "Sure." I twisted the cap off, took a slow drink. "Where at?" "Oh, that little place by the harbor." "The new one." "Name?" She blinked, then laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You and your details. You know me. Always about the details." She walked over, placed a hand on my arm, the way she used to when she wanted something. "You don't have to check up on me." I smiled. "I know." She left 10 minutes later. I waited exactly 5 before pulling out my phone and opening the tracking app. Watched the little blinking dot move. Not to the harbor. Not downtown. Not anywhere near Jenna or Kate. Straight to Ethan West's house. I sat back in my chair, feeling something settle deep inside me. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Just confirmation. The thing about people like Hannah and Ethan? They thought the world worked a certain way. They thought they could play games, manipulate, twist things in their favor, and walk away unscathed. They thought consequences were for other people. They were wrong. I spent the next hour making calls, setting things in motion. The thing about being in my line of work was that information wasn't hard to get. I had access to databases, surveillance tools, people who owed me favors. It didn't take long to get a full background on Ethan. Business deals. Investments. The little legal gray areas he operated in. But it was his personal life that interested me more. His wife, Madeline West, was on the board of multiple charity organizations. Well-connected. A woman with a reputation for class and control. The kind of woman who would not take public humiliation lightly. I scrolled through the files, piecing things together. Madeline wasn't just a housewife. She had real power. And she had no idea what her husband was up to. Yet, at exactly 10:47 p.m., Hannah's car started moving again. I watched the dot retrace its path, heading back home. When she walked in, she looked relaxed, the kind of ease that came from getting exactly what you wanted. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open. She glanced at me, her smile automatic. "You're still up." I gestured to the screen. "Work." She walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't overdo it." I looked up at her. Met her eyes. Held them just long enough to see the flicker of something, uncertainty maybe. "Just for a second." "I won't." She kissed my cheek, soft, lingering just long enough to make herself believe nothing had changed. Then she walked away. I waited until I heard the shower turn on before closing my laptop. I already had everything I needed. The only thing left was deciding how I was going to end this. The next morning, I was up before Hannah. I moved through my routine the same way I always did: shower, black coffee, news playing low on the TV. She came downstairs dressed for work, her hair pinned up the way she knew I liked, but she hadn't done it for me in a long time. I didn't say anything about last night. Didn't change my tone? That would have tipped her off. Instead, I kissed her cheek like I always did and let her leave thinking everything was fine. By the time she pulled out of the driveway, Logan had already sent me a full report. Ethan West was predictable. He ran the same 3 real estate offices, played golf at the same club every Wednesday, took his wife out for dinner once a month, just enough to maintain appearances. The man was careful. He had money, reputation, a circle of influence. He wasn't reckless enough to get caught in some sleazy hotel. No, he used private residences, places off the books, owned by shell companies. Expensive, discreet. He thought that made him untouchable. I sat in my truck outside my office, scrolling through the data, committing it to memory. Hannah had been meeting him at a rental property on Sullivan's Island, right on the water, tucked behind a row of old live oaks. No cameras on the street, no nosy neighbors. Convenient, but not as private as he thought. I called Logan. I need inside. He didn't ask why. I'll have the alarm codes in an hour. At noon, I walked into the Charleston Club, the kind of place where old money did business over $300 lunches. Ethan was at a corner table, mid-conversation with 2 younger brokers. Laughing casual, like he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't make a scene. Just walked past his table, made sure he saw me, and took a seat at the bar. Ordered a steak, medium rare, let him wonder. 5 minutes later, he excused himself from his conversation and came over. Quinn, right? His voice was smooth, confident. The kind of man who'd made a career off of charm. I cut into my steak. Ethan. He leaned against the bar. Didn't expect to see you here. That makes 2 of us. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. Something on your mind? I took my time chewing, wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin. Not much. Just figured I'd put a face to the name. He forced a smile, but his fingers tapped the edge of the bar a little too quick. Did Hannah say something? Not a word. He nodded slowly, trying to read me, trying to decide if this was a casual run-in or something else. Look, Quinn, I leaned forward just slightly, kept my voice low. Don't. You talk when I tell you to. His mouth snapped shut. He wasn't used to being put in his place. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He wasn't. I let the silence hang for a second, let him feel the weight of it. Then I picked up my knife, sliced another piece of steak. You've got a good thing going. Family business. It'd be a shame if you lost all that over something stupid. Ethan exhaled through his nose, shifting his weight. I don't know what you think is happening. I smiled. You do. And I do. But here's the thing, you don't know what I'm going to do about it. That's what's keeping you up at night. He swallowed. His hand was gripping his glass a little too tight now. I pushed my empty plate forward and stood. Enjoy your lunch, Ethan. I left him sitting there, looking like he wasn't sure if he'd just been threatened or warned. By the time I got back to my office, Logan had sent me the entry codes for the Sullivan's Island house. I checked the address, mapped the layout, planned my approach. I didn't need to break anything. I didn't need to make a mess. I just needed to send a message. At exactly 1:32 a.m. I parked a few houses down, walked the rest of the way. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in places where people believe bad things don't happen. I stepped around the back, input the code, and walked inside. The place was designed for comfort, plush furniture, expensive fixtures, a stocked bar. Everything in its place. I moved through the living room, past the kitchen, down the hall. The bedroom smelled like Hannah's perfume. I opened the closet. A pair of her heels set neatly on the floor. Proof. I didn't touch anything. Didn't need to. I just placed a single item on the bed, a printed copy of Ethan's business financials. The ones his partners hadn't seen. The ones that showed a discrepancy. Then I left. By the time they'd find it, the message would be clear. I wasn't going after their affair. I was going after everything. The next morning, Hannah was quieter than usual. She moved through the house on autopilot, pouring coffee, checking her phone, barely looking at me. She felt something. Not guilt, she wasn't built like that, but tension. Like an animal that senses a shift in the air before the storm hits. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. The financials I had dropped in Ethan's little beach retreat were already causing ripples. Logan had sent me a message an hour ago. Ethan had been making calls, moving money, trying to plug a hole he hadn't known existed until I ripped it open. He was smart enough to know that whoever left that paper on his bed wasn't bluffing. Hannah grabbed her purse and hesitated by the door. I might be late tonight. I looked up. That right? She swallowed, just barely, then forced a smile. Work dinner. One of those team-building things. I nodded slowly. You enjoy that. She hesitated, then left. I let her go. At noon, I got another update. Ethan had been seen meeting with a lawyer downtown. Not his usual guy, this one handled crisis management. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just worried. He was scrambling. I made a call. Madeline West, the voice answered, crisp and professional. I kept my tone steady. Mrs. West, my name is Quinn Fenton. I'd like to meet. A pause. And why is that? Because your husband has a habit of lying to the people closest to him. And I believe in full transparency. Another pause, just long enough for me to know she wasn't the type to jump without thinking. Then, where? Cypress Room, 3 p.m. She hung up without another word. By the time I got to the Cypress Room, she was already there, sitting near the back. Perfect posture, tailored dress, wedding ring still on her finger. She didn't look rattled. She looked like a woman who had spent years playing a part, smiling at the right times, staying composed no matter what. She studied me as I sat down, her expression unreadable. Mr. Fenton. Mrs. West. She folded her hands on the table. You called me because of Ethan. I nodded. I assume you already have suspicions. I do. Good. Then this won't take long. I set a folder on the table. She didn't open it. Just kept watching me. I assume this is proof, she asked. Beyond a doubt. She reached for the folder, flipped it open, scanned the contents. No gasp, no flicker of emotion. Just a slow exhale. After a moment, she closed it, adjusting the ring on her finger. You could have sent this anonymously. I could have. She tilted her head slightly. But you wanted to see my reaction. Not your reaction. Your decision. She studied me again, tapping a manicured nail against the folder. And what exactly do you gain from this, Mr. Fenton? I smiled. Let's just say I believe in accountability. She considered that, then nodded. So do I. I leaned back. Then let's talk about what happens next. By evening, things were in motion. Madeline didn't waste time. She had a private investigator on retainer, lawyers who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, a media contact who could spin the story just right. She wasn't interested in public humiliation, she was interested in ruin. I respected that. Meanwhile, Hannah was about to walk into a controlled detonation. She got home around 9, smelling like a hotel lobby, moving carefully like she was rehearsing how she'd play this. She smiled, put her purse down, started making small talk about her work dinner. I let her go on, let her think she still had control of the narrative. Then I pulled out my phone, opened a video, and hit play. It was grainy but clear enough, her stepping out of Ethan's car, walking into the Sullivan's Island house. A timestamp. Undeniable. Her smile dropped. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Quinn. I stood. Don't. She shut her mouth. I took my time, grabbing a glass from the counter, pouring water. You had your fun. Now I'm going to have mine. Her face drained of color. What does that mean? I drank the water, set the glass down. It means I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to ask you why. Because I don't care. She swallowed, eyes darting toward her phone. She was calculating, figuring out how to pivot. Quinn, please, stop talking. She flinched. I leaned forward, bracing my hands on the counter. Ethan's wife knows. She's filing for divorce. By this time next week, his career will be dead. You? You're about to lose everything. Her breath hitched. I grabbed another folder, tossed it onto the counter. That's the financial breakdown of our assets. The ones you won't have access to. The house? Mine. The accounts? Locked. You'll get exactly what I decide to give you. And nothing more. She stared at the folder like it was a loaded gun. I stepped around the counter, closer until she had to meet my eyes. You walked into this thinking there wouldn't be consequences. That was your mistake. Her lip trembled. First real crack in her armor. Quinn. No. You don't get to talk. You don't get to cry. You made this decision. Now you live with it. She stared at me, breathing uneven. She wasn't used to this version of me. The one who had all the power. I walked past her, grabbed my keys. Where are you going? She asked, voice small. I stopped at the door. Wherever the hell I want. Then I walked out, leaving her in the ruins she'd built for herself. The divorce papers were delivered the next morning. No drawn-out arguments, no attempts at negotiation. Just a process server handing Hannah an envelope while she stood in the doorway of the house that wasn't hers anymore. I wasn't there to watch it happen, but I didn't need to be. Logan had sent me a message. Delivered. She looked like she'd been hit by a truck. She had 3 days to get out. I spent the morning in my office, not bothering to check my phone when it vibrated every few minutes. I already knew what it was. Hannah trying to call, texting apologies, justifications, bargaining attempts. They all followed the same pattern. First, denial, then excuses, then regret, then finally desperation. At noon, I met Logan at McKinley's, a bar near the waterfront where the contractors drank after long ops. Dark wood, low lights, stiff drinks. It wasn't a place for people looking for comfort. It was a place for men who understood how the world really worked. Logan slid a file across the table. It's done. Ethan's finances are officially in the blender. His partners are jumping ship. And Madeline? She's making sure he never works in this town again. I flipped through the papers, scanning the damage. Ethan had been clever about hiding money, but not clever enough. His real estate firm was bleeding from 3 different directions. 2 business partners had pulled out, 1 was suing. The media had picked up on the divorce, and the Charleston Business Review had just published a piece hinting at his ethical failures. A sanitized way of saying he was radioactive. I tossed the file aside, signaled the bartender for another drink. And Hannah? Logan leaned back, smirking. She's been calling everyone. Friends, family, even her sister. Nobody's biting. You built a life she enjoyed, but she never built one of her own. Now she's realizing that. I took a sip of whiskey, let it burn down slow. Good. Logan watched me for a second, then shook his head. Gotta say, man, I expected you to blow up, go nuclear. But this, he tapped the file. This is something else. I met his eyes. Emotions get in the way. This way they don't just lose. They know why they lost. He exhaled, shaking his head with a grin. Cold. I didn't respond, just finished my drink. By the time I got home, Hannah's car was gone. A moving van sat in the driveway, 2 guys hauling boxes into the back. I stood outside for a second, watching. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt inevitable. I stepped inside. The house was quieter, emptier. She'd taken her things. Clothes, furniture from the guest room, a few pieces of artwork I never liked anyway. The photos were gone from the shelves, the bathroom counter was clear. I walked through each room, taking stock, making mental notes of what I'd need to replace. In the bedroom, the closet door hung open. My side untouched. Hers? Stripped bare. Only a single black dress lay on the floor, half crumpled, like she'd dropped it in a rush. I stared at it for a second, then turned off the light and walked out. Later that night, I sat on the back porch, a beer in one hand, my phone in the other. One unread text from an unknown number. You got what you wanted. I hope you're happy. I deleted it. The thing about people like Hannah? They never understood that happiness had nothing to do with it. A week passed. Then 2. The house was quieter, cleaner, more like it used to be before Hannah started rearranging things to suit her tastes. The space felt lighter without the weight of her presence, without the constant calculations running in the back of my mind, tracking her movements, her lies. Now, everything was exactly where I wanted it. I had control again. Hannah didn't fight the divorce. She couldn't. The financials had been locked down before she even knew they were at risk. The lawyers handled the rest. The settlement was neat. She got nothing she hadn't come in with. No house, no alimony, no access to my accounts. She moved into a small apartment downtown, close to nothing that mattered, and the last I'd heard, she was looking for work. Ethan didn't get off easy either. His career was over. The business was sinking fast, and with Madeline cutting him loose, his credit lines dried up. Last I heard, he was liquidating assets, trying to keep up with legal fees and child support. He had no way out, no leverage left. I had no reason to check up on Hannah, but I did. Not because I cared, not because I wanted her back, just because I liked knowing. That was the thing about people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. They never saw it coming when the ground shifted under them. And once they lost, they never recovered. Logan and I met at Sullivan's Garage, a local spot where the guys took their bikes for tuning. Logan was sitting on the hood of his truck, sipping from a styrofoam cup, watching one of the mechanics work. You heard. I grabbed a cup from the counter, poured my own coffee. What? Hannah showed up at Ethan's new office last night. I raised a brow. She that desperate? She thought she could use him as a safety net. He smirked. Guess she forgot she was just a side piece. I shook my head, took a sip of coffee. And? He shut her down. Told her he had his own mess to clean up. She didn't take it well. I let that sit for a second. Hannah had always been strategic. She'd planned her exit, expected Ethan to be there with open arms. Now she was seeing what life looked like when the safety net wasn't there. Logan stretched, tossing his empty cup into the trash. You gonna call her? I scoffed. For what? He grinned. Just making sure you haven't gone soft. I chuckled, shaking my head. Not in this lifetime. That evening I went home, grilled a steak, drank a beer on the porch. No texts, no calls, no explanations. Just quiet. The way it should be. Hannah had thought she was making a choice, that she was stepping into something better. She hadn't realized she was just stepping out into nothing. Now she had to live with it. Me? I had work to do. And I didn't waste time looking back. The last loose thread tied itself up a month later. I was in my office reviewing a new contract for a high-net-worth client when Logan walked in, tossing a folded newspaper onto my desk. Figured you'd want to see this. I glanced at the headline. West Real Estate Firm Files for Bankruptcy Amid Legal Battles. I leaned back, scanning the article. Ethan had burned every bridge he had left. His business partners had cut him loose, his investors pulled out, and with Madeline's divorce team going for the throat, there wasn't much left to salvage. He tried to play damage control, even attempted to set up a new firm under a different name, but word had spread. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man who had no credibility, no leverage, no way to keep his operation afloat. I set the paper aside. Expected sooner. Logan smirked, dropping into the chair across from me. Madeline made sure he bled out slow. I had to admit I respected it. She had handled it clean, no theatrics, just strategy. She didn't rant, didn't scream, didn't make a spectacle. She just took everything and walked away without looking back. Hannah had tried to call me once. The number had popped up a few weeks ago, but I let it go to voicemail. No message. No second attempt. She knew better. There was nothing left to say. I pushed back from my desk, stretching. Anything else? Logan shrugged. Nah. Just figured you'd enjoy knowing it's all wrapped up. I nodded. It was. There was nothing left to clean up, no unfinished business. That night, I drove out to Folly Beach, sat on the hood of my truck, watched the tide roll in. The air was cool, the wind sharp, the waves breaking against the shore in a steady rhythm. Hannah was gone. Ethan was ruined. My business was stronger than ever. And for the first time in a long time, there was nothing pulling at the edges, no threats circling in the dark. I took a sip of my beer, let the silence settle. Some men lose themselves when their world collapses. They break down, drown in self-pity, waste time looking for answers that don't exist. Not me. I had built something solid, something untouchable. And when someone tried to tear it down, I did what I always did. I handled it. And now? Now I moved forward.